Hi friends, I'm Earl Whitaker. Welcome back to Whispering Cottage Home. I was thinking today about the winter when the cold seemed to have a mind of its own. It came in under doors, through window frames, up from the floorboards, and somehow even into your sleeves when you were sitting still. We did not have much that year, and the house we lived in did not forgive a family for being short on money. It was an old clapboard place with narrow rooms and loose windows, and when the wind came across the fields at night, the whole house seemed to sigh. If this brings back a memory from your own childhood, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Maybe your family had a room like ours too, one place everybody gathered when the rest of the house had gone cold. That winter, we kept one room warm. It sounds simple when I say it now, but back then it was the whole arrangement of our lives. The front room became our kitchen, parlor, study hall, sewing room, sick room, and Sunday resting place all at once. The rest of the house was not abandoned, exactly, but it belonged to the cold. We hurried through the bedrooms. We changed clothes with our teeth clenched. We could see our breath upstairs some mornings, and the water glass beside my bed sometimes wore a thin skin of ice by dawn. But the front room had the stove. It was a black cast iron thing with little legs and a belly that glowed dull red when father got it going right. It stood near the inside wall on a square of old tin, and mother polished the top of it with a rag until it had a soft dark shine. There was always an enamel kettle sitting there, white with a blue rim and a chip place near the spout. It gave off a little steam when the room was right, and that steam made the windows fog around the edges like the room was breathing. I must have been 9, maybe 10. Old enough to know we were saving money, but not old enough to understand how close worry can sit beside a grown person without making a sound. Father worked at the feed mill then. The hours were not steady in winter, and his hands were always cracked across the knuckles. He kept them wrapped around his coffee cup some evenings, not drinking so much as holding on. Mother took in mending for 2 families on our road and 1 widow from town. She had a wooden sewing basket with a broken handle tied up in twine, and inside it were buttons in a tobacco tin, darning cotton, scraps of flannel, and a little pair of black scissors that nobody was allowed to touch but her. That front room had a braided rug on the floor, faded in places where our feet had worn it thin. The rug had come from my grandmother's house, and mother said it was made from old coats and dresses. I remember tracing the different colors with my eyes when I was supposed to be doing arithmetic. A strip of brown might have been Grandpa's Sunday coat. A narrow blue piece might have been Aunt Lila's skirt. It seemed to me the rug was made of people who had gone before us. There was a wooden chair near the stove with one rung that had been repaired twice. Father sat there in the evenings, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, listening to the radio. It was a square brown radio with a closed speaker front and a dial that glowed amber in the dark. When the signal drifted, Father would reach out slowly and turn the knob as if he were opening a faraway door. Sometimes we heard news, sometimes music, sometimes only static, like snow falling through wires. Mother sat on the other side of the stove, with the mending in her lap. She wore a grey house dress, and, over it, one of Father's old sweaters with the cuffs rolled back. When she bent her head over a sleeve or a sock, the lamplight caught the silver in her hair. She was not old then, not even close, but worry had a way of putting a little winter on her face. My sister Ruth and I did our schoolwork at the small table pulled close to the stove. It was not a proper desk. It was a kitchen table that had followed us from one rented place to another, its top marked with knife lines, ink spots, and one burn circle from a too-hot pan. Mother kept a square of oilcloth over it during meals, yellow with little red flowers, and every night she wiped it clean as if that small act could put the whole house back in order. We wore wool socks to bed, and sometimes 2 shirts under our sweaters. Ruth was younger and complained less than I did, which made me feel ashamed and stubborn at the same time. She had a blue knitted blanket that Mother had made from unraveled yarn. It did not match itself. One corner was navy, one was grey, and the middle had a strip of green that had once been part of something else. Ruth dragged that blanket around the room like it was a royal robe. and when she sat near the stove, the cat would climb onto it and make himself heavy. The cold made ordinary things feel important. A cup of cocoa, thin as it was, seemed like a ceremony. Toast made on the stove with a fork tasted better than any store-bought treat. A baked potato held in a towel could warm your hands before it filled your stomach. Mother would say, "Careful now, don't burn your fingers." And we would toss it back and forth, laughing because it was too hot to hold and too precious to drop. There was not much privacy that winter, but I do not remember minding it. Everybody's small sounds lived together in that one room. Father clearing his throat, Mother's needle passing through cloth, Ruth whispering spelling words to herself, the stove ticking and settling, the kettle sighing, the wind pressing against the windows like somebody who wanted in. On Sundays, after church we stayed in our good clothes only long enough for Mother to say we had made an effort. Then we changed quick and came back to the front room. Sometimes neighbors stopped by, stamping snow off their boots on the back step. They never stayed long because everybody was careful with everyone else's heat in those days. Mrs. Henley brought a jar of apple butter once, wrapped in newspaper. Mr. Price brought a small bundle of kindling and said he had split too much, though Father and I both knew no man ever split too much in January. People had pride then, but they had ways of kindness that did not make you feel smaller. They would say, "This was extra," or "We can't use all this." And you accepted it because one day you might be the one carrying something to their door. The hardest part came in February, when the coal bin got low. I remember the day because Father stood in the back room longer than usual, looking down into that dark wooden bin. I had followed him, though I knew better. The air back there was sharp enough to hurt your nose. He lifted the shovel and let the coal slide through it, slow, measuring with his eyes. There was not much left. Not enough for the cold snap the radio man said was coming. Father did not speak right away. Then he said, "Go on back in where it's warmer." I went, but I carried his silence with me. That evening the room felt different, though nothing had changed. Mother still mended, Ruth still read from her schoolbook. The stove still gave its heat. But grown-up worry had entered the room and taken a seat. I watched Father fold the newspaper and unfold it again. Mother looked at him once, and he looked back. There was a whole conversation in that look, one children are not meant to hear but sometimes feel anyway. The next morning, Mother told us we would all be careful. Doors were to be shut quick. No running in and out. No wasting hot water. No standing with the icebox open. No asking for more light than we needed. She said it kindly, but her voice had edges. That week, I began to notice what my parents did without announcing it. Mother warmed bricks on the stove and wrapped them in old towels for our beds, but I never saw one in hers. Father gave me the chair nearest the heat and sat back by the wall, where the draft found his ankles. When there was a little extra milk, Ruth got it. When there was a heel of bread, Father said he was not hungry. Back then, I thought adults simply needed less. Less food, less sleep, less comfort, less reassurance. I did not know they were handing pieces of themselves quietly across the room. One night, the wind was so strong it rattled the loose pane near the radio. Snow had piled halfway up the porch steps, and the road was gone under it. School had been cancelled for 2 days. Father came home early, his cap white with snow and his face tight from the cold. He carried a sack over one shoulder, not large, but heavy enough that he set it down slow. "Got a little call from Mr. Gentry," he said. Mother looked up from a pair of trousers she was patching. "Did you pay him?" Father rubbed his hands together over the stove. "I will." That was all he said. I knew then, in the way children know things without being told, that the call had come ahead of the money. Father did not like owing. He was a gentleman, but owing sat on him like a wet coat. That night he listened to the radio with his eyes closed, and when a fiddle tune came through clear for a few minutes, he tapped one finger against his knee. I remember being relieved by that finger. It meant some part of him was still able to hear music. The room did its best for us. The stove warmed our socks when we hung them from the chair backs. The kettle loosened the air. The old patchwork quilt over the doorway helped keep the heat from traveling down the hall. That quilt had little squares from dresses, shirts, flour sacks, and one red piece Mother said came from a Christmas apron her mother wore before I was born. In the daytime, it looked ordinary. At night, with lamplight behind it, those patches seemed almost like little windows into other years. Ruth and I made games out of staying near the stove. We played checkers with mismatched buttons on a cardboard board. Father drew for us. We took turns reading aloud from an old book with a cracked spine. We roasted bits of bread on a long fork and pretended they were campfire feasts. On the coldest nights, Mother let us spread a blanket on the floor and sleep in the front room. Ruth thought it was an adventure. I pretended to think so too. I remember lying there on the braided rug, wrapped in quilts, looking at the underside of the table and the legs of the chairs. The stove made a soft orange light through the little draft door. Father rose once in the night to add coal, moving carefully so he would not wake us. But I was awake. I watched him stand there in his long underwear and work pants, his shoulders bent, the shovel in his hand. He was only in his 30s, though in my memory he seemed ancient with responsibility. He turned and saw my eyes open. "You all right, son?" he whispered. "Yes, sir." "Good." He came over and tucked the quilt tighter around my feet. His hand stayed there a moment, heavy and rough through the cloth. Then he went back to his chair and sat in the dark until the stove caught again. I have lived in many houses since then. Some had good insulation, clean furnaces, and thermostats you could set without thinking. Later in life, after home improvement stores came along with aisles full of weather stripping, storm windows, and all the things we never had, I learned what a house could be when money was not quite so tight. My wife and I even did a little home renovation on our first place, and I remember feeling proud of sealing the windows before winter. We talked about home comfort, small home ideas, and making do, though I do not think I used those words back then. But no room I have lived in ever held people the way that front room did. It was not fine interior design. Nobody would have called it farmhouse style, though now folks might look at an old wooden chair, a patched quilt, and a black stove and see vintage home decor. To us, it was just what we had. Heirloom furniture was not a phrase we used. A chair was kept because it still held a person. A blanket was saved because somebody's hands had made it. A kettle stayed on the stove because steam helped the windows and because tea could stretch an evening. Years later, after Father was gone and Mother had grown small in her chair, I asked her about that winter. I expected her to talk about fear, or bills, or how close we came to running out. She looked away toward the window and smiled a little. "That was the winter you children learned to sit still," she said. I laughed, but she did not. Then she added, "And it was the winter your father thought he had failed." That caught me hard. Failed. All those years I had remembered him as the man who kept the fire alive. He remembered himself as the man who could not heat the whole house. Only after I grew older did I understand the difference between a child's memory and a parent's memory. I remembered Coco, blankets on the floor, radio music, and Mother's needle flashing in lamplight. Father remembered the coal bin. Mother remembered counting coins and pretending not to be cold. Ruth remembered the cat sleeping on her blanket. Each of us carried the same winter, but not the same weight. I wish I could tell Father now that he did not fail us. I wish I could tell him that the one room he kept warm was enough. More than enough, maybe. It was the place where I learned that love is not always spoken. Sometimes it is a shoveled scoop of coal at midnight. Sometimes it is a brick wrapped in a towel and placed at a child's feet. Sometimes it is a mother turning a worn cuff inside out so a shirt can last another month. Sometimes it is a father taking the drafty chair and pretending he likes it there. That winter did not make us rich. It did not fix the old house, or fill the coal bin, or stop the wind from coming under the door. but it gathered us. It pulled us close around one small circle of heat, close enough to hear each other breathe, close enough to know the sound of a page turning, a needle pulling thread, a radio song drifting in and out. Maybe that is why I remember the room so clearly. Not because it was pretty, though in my mind it has a tenderness no home makeover could improve. Not because it was easy, because it was not. I remember it because everything that mattered had to come close to survive. If this story reminds you of someone you loved, share their name or memory below. I think these old memories deserve a place to be spoken. The older I get, the more I believe a family home is not measured by the number of rooms it keeps warm. It is measured by what happens when there is only one warm room left. I can still see mother's hands folding the mended clothes. I can still see father leaning toward the radio, listening through the static. I can still hear Ruth laughing when the cat stole her place by the stove. I can still smell damp wool, coal smoke, toast, and that faint sweetness of apple butter from Mrs. Henley's jar. And I can still feel that room around me. Small, plain, drafty at the edges, but holding us. The winter we kept one room warm. I thought we were poor because the rest of the house was cold. Years later, I understood we were being held together by the only kind of warmth that lasts. Thank you for spending a little time with me here at Whispering Cottage Home. If this memory brought back a room, a stove, a parent, a winter, or a little house you still carry in your heart, I hope you'll leave a comment, like this video, and subscribe for more quiet stories from the old days. And wherever you are tonight, I hope there is a light in the window, a chair that remembers you, and someone close enough to share the warmth.